As a young man, I didn't understand the importance of a simple life. I was driving a truck for a construction company in the early 90s, and I had the awesome opportunity to go to a place called Iuka, Mississippi. I didn't hear a, woo, Iuka. To get to Iuka, Mississippi, you have to do some driving through Nowhere, Alabama. Now, I was just a few miles outside of Nowhere, Alabama, when I started to think I'm getting close to Iuka, Mississippi. I can see a steel bridge coming up. And that steel bridge is going to take me over the lower portion of the Tennessee River. So I must be getting close to Mississippi. And just about that time is when I saw a sign. A real simple sign. I think it was on cardboard, just like this. Now, with advertising that poetic and simple, how could I not stop? So I pulled in, I filled up, and I went inside the gas station, and behind the counter was a gentleman that had to be in his 90s. Big grin on his face, sitting on a stool. I think he was eating peanuts. "What can I do for you, fella?" I said, "Sir, is Iuka over that bridge?" He shook his head and looked at me. He said, "Son, I've lived here my whole life. I ain't never been over that bridge." At 22 years old at the time, I could not fathom why someone would want to live such a simple life. Now at 42 years old, I want to know how to live that type of simple life. So I've decided that the only way that I'm going to be able to do that is if I stop, look, and listen. Now that might sound very familiar to you because all of us as children were taught at railroad crossings and at street corners to stop, look, and listen. Since then, we've may had the opportunity to teach children. Some cases we may have taught grandchildren. But it's not just a best demonstrated safety practice. It can also be the key to living a more simple life. There are usually two ways that your life can get simplified. You can take action and make changes in your life, or life can do it for you. I've had the opportunity to experience it both ways. In January of 2007, my youngest son, Michael, who at that time was 5 years old, was riding his scooter in the driveway. Now, he had his helmet on, but he had a fall. Now, knowing that kids at that age are made of rubber, evidently, because after a few minutes of crying, he bounced right back up and was laughing with his brother. All is right with the world. But the next morning, he had this large bruise on his hip, and he had a raging fever. Dr. Mom stopped, looked, and listened. She took him down to the pediatrician. Let's run some x-rays just to make Dr. Mom feel better. Let's run some blood work just to make me feel better. X-rays were clear. There was no breaks. The blood work, maybe nothing, but you know what? His white blood cell count is abnormally high. Usually just means you're fighting an infection. He's 5 years old. Has he had a cold lately? No. Has he had the flu this year? No. The pediatrician, who could have sent us home with some aspirin, stopped, looked, and listened. He sent us down to the ER on a Monday night. Not exactly the most fun thing to do with two young boys. We saw 8 doctors before midnight. We had 4 more sets of x-rays. We had at least a half a dozen more blood samples taken from my 5-year-old son. All they knew was that his leg wasn't broken and he has a high white blood cell count. We want to admit you into hematology. Okay. 4 days and hundreds of tests later, they said, Mr. Byrd, there's something we'd like to do today, but we need you to sign a stack of forms this high. I said, now what is that? He said, we would like to take a bone aspirate. Now, because this speech is on simplicity, this is the most complicated word I am going to use all day long, so I figured I would put it up on the board for you. For those of you that have not had a bone aspirate or are not in the medical field, that is a fluid sample, in this case, from his bone marrow. And I said, aspirate what? And they said, sir, we want to rule out cancer. I had not slept in a few days. My head was spinning, but I have to tell you, at that point, I stopped, I looked, and I listened. They were not able to rule out cancer. In fact, his femur bone was 98% cancer cells. The diagnosis was leukemia. Now tell me something, Doc, I said. How do you get leukemia from falling off a scooter? He said, you don't, Mr. Byrd. That's just how we found it early. That's how we got it diagnosed, was because of the fall. So what you're trying to tell me, Doc, is what would have happened if Dr. Mom hadn't stopped, looked, and listened? What if the pediatrician hadn't stopped, looked, and listened? Well, Mr. Byrd, in 3 to 4 weeks, your son would have gotten very ill, suddenly. And if someone would have stopped, looked, and listened, we would have caught it much later, and our success rate would be much lower. We'd like to start chemotherapy immediately. Everything changed that day. Life became very simple. Side note, that pediatrician will forever be on my Christmas card list. But life became very simple. The first thing that came simple in my life, my calendar. I'm a big Outlook calendar guy. Wiped it clean. My life for 3 months became one of 2 things. Sitting in a chair in a hospital bed next to my 5-year-old son. Sitting on a chair next to my 7-year-old son at home, comforting, trying to explain to him what was wrong with his little brother. While my wife sat in a chair at the hospital next to the 5-year-old son. Eventually, my son was able to come home and continue his treatment at an outpatient clinic, which consisted of 3.5 years of pills, tests, transfusions, and some more extended hospital stays. Now, as we realized this was going to be a marathon, you guys heard, some of you have heard that phrase before. It's not going to be a marathon. It's going to be it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. The doctors encouraged us to start adding some things back into our life. Activities, commitments, hobbies, so that we could create a life that they called the new normal. Now, we could have taken all those pre-diagnosis activities and just dumped them right back on our calendar. But we stopped, we looked, and we listened, and realized that in a very, very short period of time, we had learned a lot about ourselves. We had learned that we had a lot more endurance than we ever could imagined, and we could go days without sleep, if necessary. We learned that many people, some who I had never met would go to extreme lengths to help me and my family. I learned that helping someone else with their life challenges would help me get out of my own head and help avoid the cycle of self-pity. I also learned that somebody or something was looking after me and always had been, and I would have noticed earlier in my life if I had stopped, looked, and listened. So I made a decision that I was going to be more intentional about what I allowed to get back on that calendar, to get back into my life. I was going to be more intentional about what I let back in my heart. So, first thing I did is I thought about exercise and diet. I now felt I could use some of that endurance that I learned about to make some healthier decisions. So I stopped, looked, and listened to what my body was trying to tell me. I started volunteering. Again, helping someone else get you out of your own head. Now, through mission trips and local activities, domestic, abroad, down the street, construction projects, helping people dig out their basements after a hurricane, all of that work, do you know what the thing that people appreciated the most was when I stopped, looked, and listened to their story? That I took home immediately and tried to use every day. That led to writing and speaking so that I could share my story with other people and help them realize that they could stop, look, and listen. Reconnecting and building relationships, for instance, with my immediate family. Now that all of our conversation time wasn't spent on logistics, pill schedules, doctor visits, we could actually start getting to know each other again. We could stop, look, and listen to each other. Now, I'm very happy to say that we've been blessed, and Michael is alive and well, taller than his mom, and breaking little girls' hearts at a local middle school. You can either wait for life to simplify things for you, or you can start making some decisions to simplify your life today. So I want you to challenge you right now to stop, look, and listen to your priorities. Hey, what'd you do? What are you doing this weekend? I'm cleaning out my basement. Didn't you do that last weekend? No, that was the attic. What are you doing next weekend? Cleaning out the shed. Are you spending time moving around your stuff? Maybe it's time to eat off the good china. How are you spending your time? It's hard to say no to the good stuff. But as Covey said, are you making the most important thing the most important thing? Stop and listen to your body. What is it trying to tell you? Is it trying to tell you to turn off the computer and go to sleep now? Is it trying to tell you that 5 cups of coffee is enough for now? Stop, look, and listen to your spirit. Are you making time to be still and listen every day of your life? You can call it prayer, you can call it meditation, you can call it yoga. I really don't care what you call it, but you need to make time for it. Stop, look, and listen in your decision making. When I was led to the TEDxKatuah Plateau, the real estate agent really didn't want to show me that simple cabin in the woods. He said, "Mr. Byrd, it doesn't have a dishwasher." I said, "I'd like you to meet my 2 dishwashers. They're named Michael and Stephen." Simplify. So now that we're not moving our stuff around, we once again had the opportunity to start filling our bucket up again. Because this little place in the woods, I ended up moving into it, by the way. No attic, no basement, 2 dishwashers. You met them. So how do we spend our time? I found an artistic community where I could interact with other people who like to dream. My wife found a volunteer community where she can help people with a hand up and not just a hand out. My boys found a main street where I could let them loose on a Friday night as long as they promised at the cross of the street to stop, look, and listen. Say it with me. Stop, look, and listen. Sometimes my son Michael will come into my home office and he'll stand there and wait for me to stop typing. And just when I think he's about to ask for the entire world with a giant bow on it, he says, "Dad, how was your day? You want to go outside and play football?" I hope none of you have to be forced to simplify your life. I hope you decide to stay today to stop, look, and listen. Stop. Make time every day to be still. Listen. Listen to your loved ones. Listen to your body. Listen to your inner voice. Listen to your higher power. Listen to the leaves. Practice these things in your life will not only be simpler and richer, but it also can be more satisfying as well. Son, I've lived my whole life. I ain't never been over that bridge. Well, now that I've been over that bridge and back, I think I'll stay over here for a little while. Maybe enjoy some bait, ice, and some beer. Thank you.